The tower's upper chamber filled with green mist, and every soldier inside knew they were about to die. Screams echoed off stone walls slick with something that used to be human. 20 of the association's strongest hunters stood frozen, weapons raised, faces pale under their helmets. In front of them, a robed figure knelt over a circle of bones, chanting words that made the air feel thick and wrong. Above the circle, a shape was forming. Rotting flesh. 6 eyes. A crown made of teeth. The Plague Lord was waking up. One of the hunters, a captain with silver hair and a reputation for never retreating, took a step back without meaning to. His legs did it on their own. Beside him, a younger hunter dropped to his knees and started praying. Quietly, like the words might matter to something that could still hear. Nobody blamed him. Reports said this boss had wiped 3 raid teams already, in 3 different countries, and left nothing behind but ash and broken cameras. Then a door at the far end of the chamber opened. No announcement, no dramatic wind, just a door, and a man walking through it like he'd wandered into the wrong meeting. He wore a plain black coat, slightly wrinkled, like he'd slept in it. No sword, no glowing aura, no entourage of assistants filming his entrance for a highlight reel. He looked, if anything, mildly annoyed, the way a person looks when they've been called in on their day off. The captain recognized him immediately. Everyone did. Kong Yu-sung, the player the internet had nicknamed Khan, though he never asked for the title and rarely used it himself. "You're late," the captain said, voice tight. Khan glanced at his phone, checked the time, and slid it back into his pocket without answering. He looked past the captain toward the ritual circle, toward the thing crawling up out of bone and rot, and his expression didn't change at all. Not fear, not excitement, just the mild focus of someone checking a delivery had arrived. The hunters didn't understand it. To them, this was the end of the world walking toward them one heartbeat at a time. To Khan, it was Tuesday. That gap between what everyone else felt and what he showed on his face was the first thing anyone learned about him, and the thing almost nobody ever really understood. The cultists screamed something in a language that hurt to listen to, and the Plague Lord tore itself free from the circle completely. Its body was the size of a small building. Where it stepped, the floor blackened and sagged, like the stone itself was rotting under its weight. The captain shouted for a retreat. Nobody moved. Their legs wouldn't obey, pinned by something between fear and the boss's passive aura, an invisible pressure that made ordinary humans feel like insects standing in front of something ancient. Khan walked forward anyway, hands still in his pockets. "Get behind me," he said, not loudly, but clearly enough that every hunter in the room heard it, and somehow found the strength to move. They didn't know what he was about to do. They only knew, from rumor and half-verified clips online, that he'd survived fights nobody else walked away from. That was enough to trust him, even if trust wasn't really the word. It was closer to desperation with a familiar face attached. The Plague Lord's 6 eyes locked onto him. A pulse of green energy rolled off its body, thick enough to see, and where it touched the floor, cracks spread and hissed with rot. Khan tilted his head slightly, studying it the way a technician studies a machine that's about to break down. Somewhere behind him, one of the younger hunters whispered a question nobody answered. What is he even going to do against that? The truth was, nobody in that room had ever seen what Khan could really do. For 3 years, since the towers first appeared, he had fought using nothing but ordinary skills. Basic strikes, simple techniques any high-ranked player could copy. Footage of his battles circulated constantly, dissected by analysts, copied by fans, studied by governments trying to understand how one man kept surviving fights that killed entire elite squads. None of them had the full picture, because the abilities the cameras captured weren't the abilities that actually won his fights. He kept his real strength hidden, on purpose, every single time, and the only reason he was about to break that pattern now was simple. No cameras worked this deep in the tower. No drones. No live broadcast. Whatever happened in this chamber would exist only in the memories of 20 terrified hunters and whatever was left of the Plague Lord. That was enough privacy for him to stop holding back. The boss lunged, faster than something its size should move, and swiped a limb the length of a bus toward the huddled hunters. Someone screamed. Khan didn't dodge. He stepped into the strike. A ring of pale blue flame erupted around his fist a half-second before contact, and where it touched the Plague Lord's limb, the rotting flesh didn't just burn, it unraveled, disintegrating from the point of impact outward, spreading like frost in reverse. eating through muscle and bone in a way that had nothing to do with normal fire. The boss shrieked, a sound that cracked stone near the ceiling, and staggered back with half its arm gone. Nobody in the chamber moved. Nobody breathed. The captain, a man who had fought in 6 tower raids and buried 4 teammates, felt his knees weaken for a completely different reason now. Not terror, something closer to disbelief. What, he said quietly, to no one, was that? Khan flexed his fingers once, watching the last traces of blue flame fade from his knuckles, like it was nothing unusual, like he did this every morning before coffee. He'd trained that ability for over a year in complete secrecy, in towers with no witnesses, refining it in silence because he understood something most players never bothered to learn. Strength on display invited attention. Attention invited enemies. Politics, expectations, people trying to use you or trap you or turn you into a symbol you never agreed to be. He'd rather be underestimated and alive than admired and dead. The Plague Lord, wounded and furious, summoned a wave of decayed spores from its remaining limbs, flooding the chamber with a toxic cloud meant to rot flesh from the inside. The hunters scrambled back, coughing, some already turning pale as the poison reached them. Khan raised a hand, and the same pale flame spread outward from his palm in a thin ring, burning a clean bubble through the cloud around his allies. The poison that touched the flame simply stopped existing. One of the younger hunters, the one who'd been praying minutes earlier, stared at the flame with wide eyes and whispered something about it being impossible. Impossible was a word people used a lot around Khan. He'd stopped noticing it years ago. The fight didn't last much longer after that. The Plague Lord tried 3 more attacks, each more desperate than the last, and each one ended with another piece of it dissolving into ash under blue fire. When it finally collapsed, the chamber went dead silent except for the sound of its body crumbling into gray dust that the wind outside would scatter within the hour. The cult leader who'd summoned it tried to run. He didn't get far. Khan caught him by the collar without any visible effort, the same bored expression still on his face, and dragged him toward the hunters like a man returning a lost dog to its owner. "He's yours," Khan said. "Association can deal with the paperwork." The captain opened his mouth to ask a dozen questions. What was that fire? How long had he been hiding it? Why now? Why here? Why not sooner when it could have saved lives in other raids? Khan was already walking toward the exit, checking his phone again, clearly done with the conversation before it started. That refusal to explain himself, to accept praise, to play the role the public wanted from him, was the second thing anyone learned about Kong Yu-sung, and it was the thing that would make people either worship him or despise him over the next several years, sometimes both in the same week. To understand how a man reached the point of casually erasing a seasoned boss with his bare hands, you had to go back. Back before the towers, before the seasons, before the world learned that Earth was never really at the top of anything. It started 5 years earlier, on a morning nobody who survived it ever forgot. The first tower appeared without warning, rising out of the ground in the middle of Seoul like it had always been there, and reality simply remembered it too late. Within hours, similar structures tore through cities across the planet. Governments panicked. News anchors ran out of words. Then the towers opened, and the things inside them didn't wait for humanity to be ready. Kong Yu-sung was 17 when it happened, an unremarkable kid with unremarkable grades, more interested in video games than anything the adults around him considered a real future. His parents worked ordinary jobs in an ordinary building 3 blocks from where the nearest tower emerged. That building didn't survive the first wave. He never talked about the details, not with reporters, not with teammates, not really with anyone except maybe one man. What people pieced together over the years was simple enough. His parents died in the first invasion, along with thousands of others caught in the chaos before anyone understood what a tower even was. One day he had a family. The next, he had a system window hovering in front of his eyes, informing him that he'd been registered as a player, and a grief he never fully put down. Most people, faced with a loss like that, might have broken. Khan didn't break. He went quiet instead, and something in him hardened into a kind of focus that never really left. The man who found him 3 days after the collapse, sitting alone in a shelter with a stat window he didn't understand and a system message he'd stopped reading, was Mr. Park. Park wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a fighter, not really, though he could handle himself if pressed. He was an intelligence officer for the newly formed association, tasked with identifying players who might survive long enough to matter. Most of the kids on his list didn't make it past their first month. Khan was different, and Park noticed it almost immediately. Not because of raw stats. Because of the way the boys studied the system instead of panicking about it, testing skills quietly, learning patterns other players ignored in their rush to level up. Park didn't offer sympathy. He offered training, information, and something rarer than either. He treated Khan like a person worth investing in, not a weapon worth exploiting. Over the following years, while other players chased fame and sponsorship deals, Khan spent his nights in Park's cramped office memorizing every scrap of intel the association had on tower mechanics, hidden quests, ruler behavior, anything that gave him an edge nobody else had. That partnership became the only relationship in Khan's life he treated with anything close to reverence. He didn't call Park a father figure out loud. He didn't need to. Everyone who watched them together understood it anyway. By the time Season 5 ended, Khan had cleared more high-difficulty towers solo than entire raid guilds combined, and the public had started calling him things like Hero King, though he'd never once used the title himself. Interviews painted him as either humanity's greatest asset or an arrogant loner who cared more about loot than people. Both were sort of true, and neither one captured the whole picture, because nobody outside his small circle knew what he actually did behind closed doors, in towers with no witnesses, testing abilities the world had never seen. The Plague Lord fight was the first time in years he'd let even a sliver of that hidden strength show, and only because the chamber was too deep for any camera drone to follow. He walked out of that tower into a wall of press cameras waiting at the entrance anyway, the usual crowd that gathered whenever a raid finished, hungry for a quote, a soundbite, anything to fill tonight's broadcast. A reporter shoved a microphone toward him before he'd even cleared the exit stairs. "Mr. Kong, the association says the Plague Lord was neutralized in record time. Can you tell viewers what strategy you used?" Khan looked at the microphone like it had personally inconvenienced him. "I hit it until it stopped moving," he said. The reporter blinked, clearly expecting more. Somewhere behind the crowd, a woman in a saint's uniform, silver hair pulled back, healer's staff strapped to her shoulder, rolled her eyes so hard it was visible from the back row. That was Maria. She'd supported his raids for over a year now, healing him through fights most players wouldn't survive without a full team. And in that time, she'd developed the particular kind of exhausted fondness people get for someone who scares them and makes them laugh in equal measure. She pushed through the press line toward him, ignoring the cameras that immediately swung toward her instead. "You could try answering an actual question sometime," she said, falling into step beside him as he walked past the reporters without slowing down. "I did answer it. I hit it. It stopped moving. That's not a strategy, that's a summary. Same thing, if you're efficient enough." Maria sighed, the kind of sigh that carried months of practice behind it, and glanced sideways at him, checking, the way she always did after a fight, for injuries he wouldn't mention on his own. There weren't any visible ones. There rarely were, and that used to worry her more than it did now. She'd learned that Khan's silences about his own condition were usually just silence, not denial. He genuinely didn't feel the need to talk about pain unless it was bad enough to matter. "Association's going to want a full statement," she said. "Cameras love that entrance. Half the internet's probably already calling you a legend again. They'll call me something else by next week." He wasn't wrong. Public opinion on Khan swung wildly depending on the week, the headline, whatever clip went viral last. One month he was humanity's shield. The next, some outlet would run a story about his blunt interviews and paint him as cold, ungrateful, a mercenary wearing a hero's reputation he never earned honestly. He never corrected either version. Correcting people took energy he'd rather spend on the next tower. Behind them, unseen by either, one of the reporters was already typing a headline for tonight's segment, something dramatic about the Hero King's mysterious new power. None of them had actually seen the blue flame. They only had rumors, second-hand descriptions from hunters too rattled to explain clearly what they'd witnessed. The full truth of what Khan could do remained exactly where he wanted it, hidden. That gap between what the world assumed about him and what he was actually capable of was about to matter more than ever, because Season 6 was less than a week from beginning, and the towers appearing this time were going to be worse than anything humanity had faced before. A week later, the sky over Seoul cracked open like glass, and every screen on the planet lit up with the same emergency broadcast. Season 6 had begun. For most people, that phrase meant panic. Stores emptied within hours. Families who could afford it fled to designated shelter zones. Kids stayed home from school while parents watched the news on repeat, waiting for numbers, waiting for towers, waiting to learn how bad this one would be. For Khan, it meant checking a notification window, sighing at his ceiling, and getting out of bed anyway. He lived alone in a modest apartment the association had assigned him years ago. The kind of place that looked barely lived in despite 5 years of ownership. No photos on the walls, no decorations beyond a single shelf of gaming figures he never admitted buying. The only thing that gave away how much time he actually spent there was the enormous stack of energy drink cans by the kitchen sink, rinsed and stacked with strange precision, like even his trash had to be organized efficiently. His phone buzzed. Park's name lit up the screen. "You up?" Park asked when he picked up. "I'm always up. I don't sleep. I recharge." That joke's 5 years old. Still works. Park's voice carried the particular tiredness of a man who'd spent the last 3 days in briefings. Season 6 towers are already being cataloged. Association wants you on the priority list again. First towers rated extreme difficulty, which is new. We've never opened a season at extreme before. Khan pulled a shirt over his head one-handed, phone tucked against his shoulder. Which tower? Blood Moon. It's an orc stronghold. Boss is something called the Blood Moon Singer. Intelligence is thin, but the survivors from the scouting team say it uses sound-based attacks, screams that shatter armor. Cheerful. There's more. Association wants you to do a press statement before you go in. Something reassuring. The public's scared, Yusung. Extreme-rated tower on day 1 of a new season, people need to hear their strongest player isn't worried. Khan was quiet for a second, lacing his boots. "I am worried," he said. "Just not about the tower." Park didn't ask what he meant. He rarely needed to. 20 years of reading people had taught him that some worries in Khan weren't meant to be poked at, only acknowledged from a distance. The press conference happened 2 hours later in front of association headquarters, a squat concrete building surrounded by more cameras than the building probably deserved. Khan stood at a podium he clearly hated, hands in his coat pockets, staring out at a sea of microphones like they were another boss he had to clear before moving on. A reporter near the front, sharp-suited, clearly ambitious, raised her hand before anyone called on her. "Mr. Kong, the public wants to know, with towers escalating every season, are you doing this to protect humanity, or for the rewards the system provides?" The room went quiet. Khan considered the question for exactly 1 second longer than comfortable. "Both," he said. "Mostly the rewards." A ripple of shocked murmurs spread through the press pool. Someone in the back actually gasped, loud enough to be picked up by 3 different microphones. "You're saying," the reporter pressed, sensing blood, "that you fight for money and loot, not to save people?" "I'm saying I fight because it's what I'm good at, and the system pays well for it. If people happen to survive because of that, good. But don't put a crown on me for doing my job." The clip went viral within the hour. Every news outlet ran some version of the same headline by nightfall. Hero King admits he fights for profit. Comment sections split into 2 furious camps within minutes, one calling him the most honest player alive, the other calling him a mercenary hiding behind a hero's reputation. Maria found him backstage afterward, arms crossed, unimpressed. "You could have said something normal," she said. "Anything. I fight to protect people." 4 words. Everyone would have loved you. They'd have believed a lie. It's not entirely a lie. It's not entirely true either. He shrugged, already walking toward the transport vehicle waiting to take him to the Blood Moon Tower entrance. "I'd rather people be angry at something honest than grateful for something fake." Maria followed, muttering under her breath about how exhausting it was being the only person in his life who tried to manage his public image. She didn't actually mind, not really, though she'd have denied that if asked directly. Somewhere in the last year, worrying about Khan had become a habit she couldn't quite set down, even on days he made it deliberately difficult. The Blood Moon Tower rose out of a crater on the edge of the city, a jagged structure the color of dried rust, pulsing faintly under a sky that had turned an unnatural shade of red the moment the tower fully manifested. Locals said the color came from the tower itself, bleeding into the atmosphere for half a mile around it. Khan stood at the entrance gate with a small support team, Maria included, running final checks on their gear. Around them, a crowd of onlookers had gathered behind a safety barrier, phones raised, waiting to watch the feed the moment his entrance camera activated. Inside the tower, none of that mattered. No cameras worked past the 2nd floor, same as always. some quirk of tower architecture nobody had ever fully explained. Khan preferred it that way. It meant the parts of the fight that actually mattered would stay his business alone. The lower floors passed quickly. Orc scouts, easy kills, nothing that tested him. He cleared 3 floors in under 20 minutes, barely slowing his pace, collecting a handful of common cards and a title he didn't bother reading. The 4th floor was different. The air changed the moment he stepped through the door, thick with a coppery smell that clung to the back of his throat. The chamber beyond stretched wide and dark, lit only by torches burning an unnatural shade of red, and at the center of it stood a throne carved from bone and rusted iron. Seated on it was a figure unlike any boss he'd fought before. Humanoid, but wrong in the proportions, with skin the color of dried blood and a face split by a permanent, silent scream. Around its throne, chains hung from the ceiling, each one strung with small bells that hadn't rung in what looked like centuries. The Blood Moon Singer opened its eyes the moment Khan crossed the threshold. He'd read the intel Park gave him, sound-based attacks, capable of shattering armor and rupturing eardrums from a distance. What the intel hadn't mentioned, because nobody who'd faced it had lived long enough to report it clearly, was that the singer's screams didn't just damage the body. They damaged the mind, planting fear so raw it could paralyze even seasoned fighters mid-motion. Khan felt it the second the creature rose from its throne and opened its ruined mouth. The sound that came out wasn't loud in the way normal screams were loud. It was deeper than that, a frequency that seemed to vibrate directly against his skull, and for one disorienting second his vision blurred at the edges, his balance tilting like the floor had shifted beneath him. He staggered, actually staggered, boots skidding against stone, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt something close to genuine alarm. This wasn't going to be a quick fight. The singer surged forward, faster than its size suggested, chains rattling loose from the ceiling, and whipping toward him like living things. Khan rolled beneath the first, barely avoiding a second, and felt the third catch his shoulder hard enough to draw blood through his coat. He gritted his teeth. Ordinary skills weren't going to be enough here, not against something whose attacks bypassed the body entirely and went straight for the mind. He needed a different approach, something he'd been quietly developing in private towers for months, but never actually tested against a real threat. Ice. He'd discovered the ability almost by accident, buried in a hidden quest reward from a tower most players never bothered fully clearing. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even particularly powerful, compared to the blue flame he'd used on the Plague Lord. But it did something that flame couldn't. It dampened sound. Froze vibration mid-air before it could spread. He'd never had a reason to test that theory in combat. Now seemed like the right time. The singer screamed again, chains lashing toward him in a wide arc, and Khan thrust both palms forward, channeling the new ability for the first time outside a training tower. A sheet of frost bloomed across the air in front of him, thin and near invisible, catching the scream mid-flight and freezing it solid before it reached him. The chains, slowed by the sudden drop in temperature, moved a fraction slower than before, just enough for him to duck beneath them and close the distance. It wasn't a clean win. Frost this thin didn't stop physical damage, and one of the chains still caught him across the ribs hard enough to crack something. He felt it immediately, a sharp, breathless pain that told him this fight was going to cost him more than the last one had. He pressed forward anyway. Up close, the singer's scream lost some of its reach but none of its intensity, and Khan felt his thoughts scatter for a dangerous half-second as the sound hit him point blank. Old memories surfaced uninvited, fragments of smoke and rubble he usually kept buried deep enough not to think about. His parents, the building, the silence after. He shook it off harder than the wound in his ribs, forcing his focus back onto the fight in front of him, and drove his fist forward wrapped in frost thick enough to hold. The impact cracked one of the singer's ribs with an audible snap, and for the first time since he'd entered the chamber, the creature staggered back instead of forward. It wasn't over. The singer's second phase began almost immediately, its bone throne shattering behind it as its body split down the middle, revealing a second face beneath the first, silent where the original screamed. 2 mouths now, 2 frequencies, overlapping, layering fear on top of fear, until even Khan's practiced calm cracked at the edges. He thought, briefly and clearly, that this might actually kill him if he didn't adapt fast enough. The realization didn't panic him. It focused him. He pulled every scrap of ice technique he'd tested in private, combining frost with the raw speed his stat sheet gave him, weaving between the double scream instead of standing against it head-on. Every dodge cost him ground. Every counter cost him blood. By the time he found the opening he needed, driving a frost-wrapped strike directly into the exposed second face, his coat was torn at the shoulder, and his ribs screamed louder than the boss ever had. The Blood Moon Singer let out one final, fractured note, and its body dissolved into a fine red mist that dissipated into the chamber's stale air. Khan stood alone in the sudden silence, breathing hard, one hand pressed against his ribs. A notification window blinked open in front of him. Boss defeated. New title earned. Silence Bringer. New ability unlocked. Frost Requiem. Rare artifact card obtained. Bell of the Bone Throne. He read it, exhaled slowly, and allowed himself exactly 3 seconds of stillness before pushing forward toward the tower's exit. Maria was waiting near the entrance when he emerged, and the moment she saw the state of his coat, the color drained from her face. "You're bleeding," she said, already moving toward him, healing energy gathering at her fingertips before he could wave her off. "Cracked rib. Nothing new." "That's not nothing. That's a rib." She pressed both hands against his side, warm light spreading beneath her palms, and for a moment neither of them said anything, the crowd behind the barrier too far to hear the quiet that settled between them. "You scared me in there. The feed cut out the second you hit floor 4. Feed always cuts out." "I know, doesn't make it easier." He didn't have a response for that, not one he was willing to say out loud, so he let the silence stretch instead, watching the healing light knit bone back into place beneath her hands. Maria didn't push further. She'd learned a long time ago that Khan showed gratitude in ways that rarely looked like gratitude to anyone who didn't know him well enough to notice. Behind them, the crowd erupted in cheers the moment the tower's status shifted publicly to cleared, and reporters surged toward the barrier, ready to ask another round of questions he had no intention of answering honestly. He didn't stay to hear them. He never did. What none of them knew, standing there celebrating a battle they'd only seen the edges of, was how close that fight had actually come to going the other way. If he'd hesitated 1 second longer testing the frost ability, if the second face had opened before he'd found his footing, the story ending here might have looked very different. That gap between what the public celebrated and what actually happened in towers with no cameras was starting to widen, and it wouldn't be long before it drew attention from something far bigger than reporters. Something was already watching from beyond the tower walls, patient and ancient, taking careful note of a player clever enough to survive an extreme-rated boss on the very first day of a new season. The rulers had noticed him. 3 days after the Blood Moon Tower closed behind him, a new one tore itself out of the earth on the far side of the city, and this one didn't look like anything Season 6 had produced so far. It was black. Not dark, not shadowed, but black in a way that seemed to swallow the daylight around it, a structure carved from stone that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Association scouts who'd approached the entrance came back describing whispers they couldn't quite make out, voices that seemed to know their names. They called it the Demon Cult Tower, and within a day of its appearance, 3 separate raid teams had gone in and never come back out. Park called Khan personally this time, skipping the usual text message. "I don't like this one," Park said, no preamble. "Every team we've sent in has lost contact by floor 2. No bodies recovered. No system notifications logged. It's like the tower's eating the data itself. Sounds fun." "Yusung, I'm serious. Whatever's in there might be operating outside normal tower rules. I want you to go in with backup, not alone." "Backup slows me down in unknown territory. If something's eating raid teams whole, I don't want 3 extra people to keep alive while I figure out what it is." Park was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he disagreed, but had learned better than to argue this particular point. 5 years of watching Khan operate had taught him that the boy's instincts about solo versus team runs were almost never wrong, even when the reasoning behind them sounded reckless. "Fine," Park said finally, "but you check in every 15 minutes. If I don't hear from you, I'm sending everything we've got in after you." Deal. He went in alone, same as always, and the moment the tower door sealed shut behind him, the whispers Park had described wrapped around him immediately, soft and constant, murmuring words in no language he recognized. The lower floors were empty of monsters entirely, which unsettled him more than any boss could have. Empty rooms. Dust that hadn't been disturbed in years despite the tower only existing for 3 days. Doors that led to identical hallways, over and over, until he started marking the walls with frost just to confirm he wasn't walking in circles. He wasn't. The tower was building itself around him as he moved, restructuring floors to keep him lost. On the fourth attempt at breaking the loop, he stopped walking entirely and simply waited, arms crossed, staring at a wall that had shifted 3 times in the last 10 minutes. "I know you're doing this on purpose," he said aloud, to no one visible. "Whatever you are." The whispers around him paused, just for a second, like something had actually heard him and hadn't expected to be addressed directly. Then a voice answered, calm and layered, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You are the first to speak instead of run." Khan didn't flinch. He'd half expected something like this the moment the tower started rearranging itself around him. Most towers had a presence behind them, some ruling intelligence that watched from a distance. This one had apparently decided to introduce itself early. "Running seemed pointless if you're the one moving the walls," he said. "Figured talking might get me somewhere faster." Curious. The voice seemed to consider that. "Most who enter my tower beg. Or scream. You do neither. Screaming's inefficient." A pause, longer this time, and then the walls around him shifted one final time, folding away to reveal a massive chamber lit by pale violet flame. At the center of it stood a figure draped in shifting shadow, humanoid in shape but featureless, its presence pressing against the room like weight against water. This was the tower's ruler. "I am called the Shadow," it said, though the words seemed to arrive directly in his mind rather than through the air. "This tower is one of my domains. I have watched players enter it for 3 days. All of them ran from my illusions, or fought them, and were consumed for their fear. And I'm still standing here because I didn't run. Because you did not fear what you could not see. That is rarer than strength, little player. Most who reach your level of power still fear the dark. You do not." Khan considered that for a second. It was true, in a way he'd never really put words to. 5 years of losing everything that mattered to him in a single morning had burned most ordinary fear out of his system early. What replaced it wasn't bravery exactly. It was closer to indifference, a refusal to let dread slow him down when dread had never once saved anyone he loved. "So what happens now?" he asked. "You keep testing me, or we skip to the part where I clear this tower and go home." The Shadow's featureless form shifted, something like amusement rippling through its presence. "I offer you a choice most players never receive this early. Join my faction. Accept my blessing. In exchange, you gain access to abilities and intelligence no other player possesses. Refuse, and you may still clear this tower, but you walk away with nothing but the ordinary rewards a tower grants." "What's the catch?" "There is always a catch, isn't there?" The Shadow's voice carried something that might have been approval at the question. "My faction stands opposed to the Light faction, who believe towers exist to test humanity's worthiness, who believe rulers deserve obedience and gratitude. I believe towers exist because we find your species useful. I do not pretend otherwise. If you join me, you fight for your own survival and strength, not for some grand moral purpose." "Does that trouble you?" Khan almost laughed. Of all the things a cosmic being could have said to try to win his loyalty, honesty about using him wasn't one he'd expected, and it was somehow more convincing than any promise of nobility could have been. "No," he said. "That's the first honest pitch anyone's given me since this whole system started." "Then we have an understanding." A pulse of dark energy rolled out from the Shadow's form, wrapping around Khan in a sensation like cold water closing over his skin. A notification window blinked open in front of him. "Faction joined. Shadow Council. Blessing received. Umbral Sight. New contract available. Darkness. Shadow Beast Companion. Reputation. Neutral. Rising." He read through it, one eyebrow raised at the companion offer. A pet. Not merely a pet. The Shadow's presence shifted again, and from the violet flame at the center of the chamber, a shape began to form, dark and low to the ground, eyes glowing faint silver in the gloom. It stalked forward on 4 legs, part shadow and part something more solid, until it stopped directly in front of Khan and looked up at him with an intelligence far sharper than any ordinary animal. "This is darkness, born from my domain, bound to grow alongside whoever it chooses to accept as its own. It has chosen you, which is rarer than you understand. Most beasts of my domain choose no one at all." Khan crouched slightly, studying the creature. It didn't cower, didn't posture, just watched him back with the same steady focus he usually reserved for boss patterns. Something about that mutual, unbothered evaluation felt oddly familiar, like meeting someone who operated on the exact same emotional frequency he did. He reached out one hand, slowly, and darkness pressed its head against his palm without hesitation. Something in Khan's chest, a part he usually kept locked down tight enough that even he forgot it existed, loosened slightly for the first time in longer than he cared to admit. "All right," he said quietly, mostly to the creature and not the ruler looming behind it. "You're stuck with me now." The tower's remaining floors passed without further incident. Whatever guardians the demon cult had originally placed inside seemed to have vanished the moment the shadow revealed itself. Either destroyed or dismissed. Khan didn't ask which. He cleared the final chamber in under 10 minutes, collected a modest haul of cards and a title that actually made him smirk when he read it, Chosen of Shadow, and stepped back out into daylight with darkness padding silently at his heel. The crowd outside the tower entrance went dead silent the moment they saw the creature beside him. Someone in the crowd shouted a question about what it was. Khan ignored it, same as he ignored most questions shouted at him by strangers, and kept walking toward the transport vehicle, where Park stood waiting, arms crossed, clearly having aged several years in the 2 hours since Khan entered. "You're late by 20 minutes, Park said. "I was 2 minutes from sending in the National Guard." Got held up. Park's eyes dropped to Darkness, who sat calmly beside Khan's leg, silver eyes tracking the surrounding crowd with quiet suspicion. "Held up," Park repeated slowly, "by acquiring a shadow monster." "Companion, there's a difference. Is there?" Khan almost smiled, the closest he came to it most days. "He's better company than most people I know." Park sighed, the particular sigh of a man who'd stopped being surprised by anything Khan did years ago, but hadn't quite stopped worrying about the implications. "The Shadow Council. Of all the factions in this system, you had to align with the one every government report flags as morally ambiguous at best. They were honest with me. That's more than I can say for the Light faction's recruitment pitch last season." That silenced Park for a moment, because it was true, and both of them knew it. The Light faction had approached Khan twice already, each time wrapped in language about destiny and duty and the burden of the chosen. Promises dressed up as honor that never quite explained what they actually wanted from him. He'd turned them down both times, patience wearing thinner each visit. "Just be careful," Park said finally, quieter now. "Whatever you gained in there, it comes with a price eventually. Everything from these towers does. Everything has a price, Park. At least this one told me what it was up front." They drove back toward the city in relative silence after that. Darkness curled in the back seat like he'd always belonged there, and Khan watched the rust-colored skyline blur past the window, thinking about how much easier this particular alliance felt compared to every other relationship the system had forced on him. He didn't know yet how much that alliance would cost him down the line, how deeply the Shadow Council's rivalry with the Light faction would eventually pull him into conflicts far bigger than a single tower. For now, it was enough that he'd walked out with a companion who understood silence the way he did, and a faction that respected honesty over performance. Somewhere across the city, in a tower district reserved for the season's next major event, another player was watching news footage of Khan's exit with a very different reaction. Swordlord Ray Chan stood in his training hall, arms crossed, watching the shaky phone footage of a shadow beast walking calmly beside the man half the country called a hero and the other half called a fraud. "Shadow Council," Ray muttered, disgust clear in his voice. Of course he'd choose them. Beside him, one of his junior teammates shifted uncomfortably. "You know him?" "Everyone knows him. Nobody actually knows him." Ray turned away from the screen, jaw tight. "He fights for rewards and calls it honesty. I've seen people die in these towers protecting strangers for nothing in return. He walks in, takes what he wants, and lets the cameras call him whatever sells that week. The Blood Moon fight looked rough, though. Maybe he's not just—" "I don't care how rough it looked." Ray's voice hardened. "A hero fights for people, not paychecks, not power. If he really believed in protecting anyone, he wouldn't need a faction of shadow-dealing manipulators backing him up." He didn't say the rest of what he was thinking, that some part of him, quiet and unwelcome, had started watching Khan's fights with something closer to grudging respect than he wanted to admit. Ray buried that thought the same way he buried most things that complicated his sense of who deserved to be called a hero. Their paths hadn't crossed directly yet, not in any fight that mattered. But Season 6 had barely begun, and the War Tower was already forming on the horizon, an event both of them would eventually be pulled into whether they wanted it or not. Neither of them knew it yet, but that collision was coming faster than either expected. The War Tower announcement came through every emergency channel on the same morning, and this time the panic felt different from anything Season 6 had produced so far. Not because of a boss, because of the rules. Association officials explained it in a press briefing that ran twice as long as usual, visibly uncomfortable with what they were reading off the page. The War Tower, they said, wasn't a single structure like the others. It was a battlefield spread across a contested border region, split between two smaller nations still rebuilding after the first tower invasions. Inside, players would be assigned sides, not by choice, but by the tower's own judgment of which territory needed defending most. Whoever's side lost the tower's final objective would lose more than points and rewards. The tower's ruling entity had made it clear that failure meant the losing nation's territory would be annexed by the tower's dimension entirely, erased from the map the same way the first invasion had erased entire city blocks. It wasn't a game anymore, it was a war with a countdown attached. Khan read the briefing twice, sitting on his apartment floor with darkness curled against his side, and felt something settle heavier in his chest than he expected. He'd cleared towers for money, for cards, for the quiet satisfaction of solving a problem nobody else could. This was different. This was a fight where losing meant an entire country's population became refugees overnight. Park called within the hour, voice tighter than usual. "You've seen the briefing." "Yeah." "Associations assigning players by registered strength ranking to balance both sides fairly. You're being placed on the defending side. The weaker territory. Small kingdom called Varath, borders barely holding as it is. And the other side?" Park hesitated. "Just slightly. Ray Chan's leading the attacking roster. Swordlord's team is stacked. Government-backed sponsors, 3 former national champions, full support squad. Varath's side has volunteers, a handful of mid-rank players, and you." Khan absorbed that in silence for a moment. Swordlord Ray Chan. He knew the name the way everyone in the player community knew it. A hero built entirely around public image. A man who gave interviews about justice and duty with the polish of someone who'd rehearsed every line in a mirror first. They'd never actually met, never fought, but Khan had watched enough footage to form an opinion, and the opinion wasn't kind. "Why's the tower siding a coordinated national team against volunteers and one guy?" Khan said. "The tower doesn't balance for fairness. It balances for drama. Near as we can tell, every War Tower event in other regions has followed the same pattern. Strong against weak, underdog forced to survive. Comforting." "You sung." Park's voice dropped, quieter, the tone he used when he wasn't talking as an association handler anymore, just as the closest thing to family Khan had left. "You don't have to take this one. The system assigned you, but there's an opt-out clause for players who've cleared enough towers already this season. Nobody would blame you for sitting this out." Khan looked down at Darkness, who'd lifted his head slightly at the shift in his tone, silver eyes watching him with the same steady patience as always. "An entire country loses its home if Varath's side folds," he said. "I'm not sitting that out." Park didn't argue. He'd expected the answer before he finished offering the alternative. The War Tower's entrance sat on the actual physical border between the two nations, a massive gate of interlocking stone and iron that hummed with a low, constant vibration audible from half a mile away. Varath's side of the camp was small, tents pitched in uneven rows, a scattering of volunteer fighters checking gear that looked more patched together than professionally issued. The attacking camp across the field looked like something out of a national broadcast. Sponsor banners, matching uniforms. A command tent with actual air conditioning running off portable generators, visible even from this distance. Khan walked through Varath's camp without announcing himself, Darkness at his heel, and immediately drew stares from volunteers who clearly hadn't expected reinforcement of any kind, let alone reinforcement they recognized from news broadcasts. A young woman in patched leather armor, maybe 20 at most, approached him first, hesitant. "You're really him? The Hero King?" "Don't call me that. Sorry, it's just..." She gestured vaguely at the camp around them, voice cracking slightly. "We didn't think anyone strong was coming. Command said we'd be assigned support, but nobody said it'd be you." Khan looked past her at the rest of the camp, counting heads out of old habit. Maybe 40 fighters total, most of them mid-rank at best, exhausted expressions on faces too young to be fighting a war with this much riding on it. "What's the objective?" he asked. "Central Relic Tower, middle of the battlefield. Whoever holds it when the tower's timer ends wins the territory. Attacking side just needs to hold it once. We need to hold it continuously, or take it back before the deadline if they seize it first. Unbalanced from the start, same as everything else about this event. He filed that away and turned toward the command tent, already forming a plan that had nothing to do with matching the enemy's strength head-on. The battle began at dawn the next day, tower gates opening simultaneously on both sides of the field, releasing both rosters into a battlefield that stretched for over a mile, dotted with ruined structures, trenches, and the central relic tower rising from the middle, like a lighthouse nobody wanted to reach first. Ray Chan's team moved with practiced coordination, sweeping forward in formation, cutting through Vareth's outer defenses with the kind of clean efficiency that came from years of sponsored training and matching gear. Within the first hour, 3 volunteer fighters had already been forced to retreat, wounded but alive, and the relic tower's outer perimeter had fallen. Khan watched all of it from a ridge overlooking the field, arms crossed, saying nothing. The young volunteer from earlier found him there, breathless from running the message across camp. "Sir, they're already at the outer wall. We need reinforcements at the tower, or we're going to lose it in the first hour. We're not defending the outer wall." "What? Pull everyone back. Let them take it." The volunteer stared at him like he'd lost his mind, and honestly, from where she stood, the order probably sounded exactly like that. Khan didn't explain further, just watched the field below, waiting. Ray Chan's team pushed forward exactly as he expected, momentum carrying them straight through the abandoned outer defenses and toward the relic tower itself, confident and unopposed. Ray led from the front, sword drawn, cutting through minor tower guardians with clean, decisive strikes that looked, admittedly, impressive even to Khan's unimpressed eye. What Ray's team didn't know, because nobody had bothered scouting the terrain properly in their rush to claim an easy victory, was that the ground beneath the relic tower's outer courtyard had been quietly weakened over the last 6 hours by darkness, tunneling shadow-laced trenches beneath the stone, under cover of night, while the rest of Vareth's camp slept. The moment Ray's full assault force gathered in the courtyard, celebrating what looked like an unopposed capture, the ground beneath them gave way entirely, plunging half his team into a collapsed network of tunnels that separated them from the relic tower's entrance by nearly 100 meters of rubble. Chaos erupted across the enemy formation, shouted orders, scrambling. Ray himself barely avoided the collapse, catching the tower's outer railing and hauling himself up with visible effort, sword still in hand, expression darkening with realization. That was when Khan walked calmly down the ridge, alone, and entered the relic tower through a side passage nobody on Ray's team had bothered checking. By the time Ray fought his way back up through the rubble, furious and half his team scattered across a collapsed tunnel system, the relic tower's central chamber had already changed hands. Khan stood beside the tower's core, hand resting lightly against it, darkness perched on the stone beside him, like a gargoyle carved specifically for the role. Ray stormed into the chamber, sword raised, chest heaving from the climb. "You," he said, voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You collapsed the courtyard. Wasn't me directly. Ground was already weak. Convenient, isn't it?" Khan didn't move from the core, didn't reach for a weapon, just watched Ray with the same flat calm he brought to every fight that hadn't actually started yet. "You led your whole team into an open courtyard without scouting the ground first. That's not my mistake to apologize for." Ray's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Khan thought he might actually attack without another word. Instead, Ray lowered his sword slightly, though the anger in his eyes didn't fade. "You could have died down there with them," Khan added. "Might want to think about that before your next charge. Don't lecture me about strategy from a man who fights for money." "Wasn't lecturing, just an observation." Ray's grip tightened on his sword hilt, knuckles pale. "You know what people say about you? That you don't care about anyone but yourself. That you only clear towers because the rewards are good enough to bother. I used to think that was unfair exaggeration. And now? Now I'm standing in a captured relic chamber watching you gloat over a trap that could have killed a dozen people." Something in Khan's expression shifted, subtle enough that most people would have missed it, but Ray, trained to read opponents in split-second combat decisions, caught the flicker of something sharper than irritation. "Nobody died," Khan said, quieter now. "I made sure of that before the ground gave way." Darkness pulled the tunnel depth shallow enough that a fall wouldn't kill anyone, just slow them down. "If I wanted your team dead, they'd be dead." Ray's certainty wavered, just slightly, though his pride wouldn't let it show fully. "That's supposed to make it better? It's supposed to make it accurate. You can hate me for winning. Don't pretend I did it recklessly." The chamber went quiet except for the distant sound of Ray's remaining team members climbing free of the rubble below, shouting to each other, none of them seriously hurt, exactly as Khan had said. Ray stared at him for a long moment, something complicated crossing his face, respect and resentment tangled together in a way he clearly hated feeling. Then he sheathed his sword, slow and deliberate. The relic's yours, he said. Tower rules say the deadline's still running, but my team's compromised. I'm calling the retreat. Smart. Don't. Ray's voice sharpened again. Don't act like this makes us anything close to even. I still think you're exactly what people say you are. This doesn't change that. Khan shrugged, already turning back toward the relic core, ending the conversation the same abrupt way he ended most of them. Didn't ask you to change your mind. Ray left the chamber without another word, disappearing down the same rubble-strewn path his team had climbed up through, and the War Tower's status shifted publicly minutes later, confirming Varath's victory before the deadline had even reached its midpoint. The celebration in Varath's camp that night was loud and unpolished. Volunteers who'd expected to lose everything, suddenly weeping with relief instead, hugging each other, hugging Khan despite his obvious discomfort with the physical contact. The young volunteer from earlier found him near the edge of camp afterward, quieter this time. You saved our whole country today, she said. You know that, right? Saved a relic tower. Semantics. It's not semantics to us. She hesitated, then added, Why'd you really take this fight? You didn't have to. Everyone knows you could have opted out. Khan looked out at the celebration behind her, firelight flickering against tense and exhausted, grateful faces, and took a long moment before answering. Everyone deserves a fair fight, he said finally. This one wasn't fair from the start. Figured I'd even the odds. It wasn't the full truth, not exactly, but it was closer to honest than most answers he gave reporters. Somewhere underneath the blunt exterior and the reputation for caring only about rewards, there was still a 17-year-old boy who'd lost everything to a system he never asked to be part of, and some part of that boy never stopped hating the idea of anyone else losing everything the same way, especially not for something as arbitrary as an unbalanced tower assignment. He didn't say any of that out loud. He never did. But Maria, watching from across the fire where she'd been treating minor injuries all evening, caught the look on his face for just a second before he turned away, and understood a little more about him than she had that morning. A notification blinked open in front of him as he walked back toward his tent, darkness trailing quietly behind. War Tower objective complete. Reward: Sword Control. Rare ability: Conditional Acquisition. Earned through direct victory over a sword-class opponent. Achievement: Unlocked. Underdog's Champion. Reputation with Shadow Council, rising. He read through it twice, something almost like satisfaction crossing his face at the ability name. Sword Control wasn't flashy, not compared to the Frost or the Flame, but it was useful, precise, the kind of ability that rewarded patience over brute force. Fitting, given how he'd earned it. Across the battlefield, in the ruins of the attacking camp, Ray Chan sat alone outside his tent, long after his team had gone quiet for the night, sword resting across his knees, staring at nothing in particular. He'd lost today. Publicly, decisively, in a way every sponsor and every camera would dissect for weeks. And somehow, underneath the sting of that loss, he couldn't quite make himself hate the man responsible the way he wanted to. That bothered him more than the loss itself. He didn't know it yet, but this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed this season, and the next collision would force him to confront exactly what kind of hero he actually wanted to be. Not the polished version sponsors paid for, but whatever version remained once the cameras stopped rolling. For now, the War Tower's dust settled, Varath's border held, and word of the fight spread through the player community faster than any association statement could contain, cementing Khan's reputation as something even more complicated than hero or mercenary. Somewhere in that spreading story, a very different kind of attention was beginning to gather. Not from rulers, not from rival players, but from an institution Khan hadn't given much thought to in years. His old academy had started asking questions about the corruption in its own ranks, and his name kept coming up in conversations nobody expected him to be part of. The invitation arrived through official channels, which was unusual enough on its own that Khan almost deleted it without reading past the header. Soul Hunter Academy. Annual Evaluation Ceremony. Guest Evaluator requested. He'd graduated from that academy 6 years ago, back when it still ran combat classes for ordinary teenagers instead of players, back before towers existed at all. After the first invasion, the school had rebranded itself overnight, slapping a hunter training program onto its existing curriculum and charging desperate parents triple tuition for the promise of keeping their children alive in a world that no longer made sense. Khan had never gone back. Not once, not for reunions, not for the occasional press event they invited him to, and he always declined. He didn't particularly care about the place, one way or another. Park was the one who convinced him to say yes, mostly by mentioning, almost casually, that the association had received 3 separate complaints in the last month about graduating students dying within weeks of certification, far more than the national average. "Something's wrong there," Park said. "Nobody's been able to prove what. You'd have access no outside investigator would get." "I'm not an investigator. You're an evaluator this year. Same thing, different title." The academy looked exactly the way Khan remembered it. Polished stone buildings dressed up with newer signage that hadn't quite covered the old paint underneath. He walked through the front gates with darkness at his side, drawing exactly the kind of nervous, starstruck attention he'd expected from students who'd grown up watching his fights on every news channel. The headmaster, a heavy-set man named Director O who Khan vaguely remembered avoiding as a student himself, greeted him with the kind of oily enthusiasm reserved for people you needed something from. "Such an honor to have our most celebrated graduate return," Director O said, gripping Khan's hand a beat too long. "Our evaluation this year focuses on combat readiness. I trust you'll find our students exceptionally well prepared." "We'll see." The evaluation itself started simple enough, a series of standardized combat trials meant to test whether graduating students could handle low-tier tower encounters safely. Khan watched from the observation platform, arms crossed, saying little, while student after student ran through the same predictable drills. By the 4th trial, something started nagging at him, subtle at first, easy to dismiss. Students moved with confidence that didn't match their actual technique. Stats displayed on the evaluation boards looked inflated compared to what he watched them execute in the ring. One student in particular, a thin boy who could barely hold his stance under pressure, finished his trial with a passing score that made no sense given how badly he'd performed. Khan pulled the boy's evaluation sheet after the trial ended, scanning the numbers with narrowed eyes. "These stats are wrong," he said, loud enough for Director O to hear from across the platform. "I assure you, our evaluation system is thoroughly calibrated." I watched him almost fall over dodging a level 1 training dummy. "This sheet says he's rated for mid-tier tower clearance." Khan held the sheet up, voice flat but carrying clearly across the platform. "Either your calibration's broken, or these numbers are fabricated." The room went quiet in a way that told Khan he'd guessed right before anyone confirmed it. Director O's smile tightened at the edges. "Mr. Kong, I understand you have a reputation for bluntness, but I hardly think it's appropriate to accuse the Academy of—" "I'm not accusing. I'm asking why a student who can't hold a fighting stance has certification numbers that'll get him assigned to a real tower within the month." Khan set the sheet down, meeting the director's eyes directly. "Because if these numbers are what the association uses to clear students for field deployment, and they don't match reality, that's not a paperwork error. That's a death sentence with a signature on it." Murmurs spread through the watching students immediately, quiet at first, then louder as more of them exchanged uneasy glances. Some of them, Khan realized watching their faces, already suspected something was wrong. They just never had anyone with enough authority willing to say it out loud. He spent the rest of the evaluation pulling records instead of running drills, cross-referencing stat sheets against actual combat footage, and the pattern he uncovered was worse than a single inflated score. Nearly 60% of the graduating class had certification numbers that didn't match their demonstrated ability, consistently padded just enough to push them into higher deployment tiers. Higher deployment tiers meant higher tuition refund thresholds for the academy. Padded stats meant more graduates certified for dangerous towers, which meant bigger government contracts and bigger sponsor payouts for the school itself. It meant Director O had been sending underprepared teenagers into towers that would kill them, for years, to keep the academy's funding numbers looking impressive on paper. Khan stood in front of the full assembly that evening. Every student and parent gathered in the main hall expecting some kind of closing ceremony speech, and instead read the falsified numbers out loud, one certification at a time, watching Director O's face go progressively paler with each name. 60% of this graduating class has been cleared for towers they're not actually ready for, Khan finished, voice carrying flat and clear across a hall gone completely silent. That's not an evaluation problem. That's fraud, and it's going to get people killed if it hasn't already. A parent near the front stood up, voice shaking. My daughter graduated last season. She's already been deployed to a mid-tier tower. Pull her out, Khan said immediately. Today, if you can. Get her re-evaluated independently before she goes back in. The hall dissolved into chaos after that. Parents shouting questions, students crying, Director O attempting weak denials that nobody in the room believed anymore. Association officials, alerted by Park before the assembly even finished, arrived within the hour to seize academy records and begin a formal investigation. Khan left before the worst of it, darkness padding quietly beside him through the chaos, and found Park waiting outside the gates, expression somewhere between grim and impressed. You just ended that man's career in front of 300 people, Park said. He ended his own career. I just read the numbers. That's not how the headlines are going to frame it. He was right, as usual. By morning, every outlet ran some version of Hero King exposes Academy corruption, though a handful of smaller sites, sponsored quietly by Academy alumni networks, ran a different angle entirely, painting Khan as a bully who'd humiliated a respected institution without proper evidence. Khan read both versions over breakfast, unbothered, and deleted the notifications without responding to either. What actually mattered, the thing no headline captured properly, was the message he got from Park 3 days later confirming that 11 students, including the thin boy from the training ring, had been pulled from active tower deployment and rescheduled for honest re-evaluation. 11 kids who might not have survived their next assignment, given a second chance because someone finally checked the numbers. That was worth more to him than any headline, good or bad. The Desert Tower rose less than a week after the Academy scandal broke, sudden and unexpected the way most towers were. This one manifesting in the middle of an actual desert region that hadn't seen a tower event in over 2 years. Association intelligence flagged it immediately as unusual, not for its difficulty rating, but for a distress signal broadcasting from somewhere deep inside, faint and intermittent, in a dialect their translation systems struggled to parse fully. What little they could translate suggested a captive. Someone important, held inside the tower against their will. Khan went in without much of a plan beyond finding the source of that signal, darkness at his side as always, moving through sand-swept corridors that shifted underfoot, like the desert itself had been folded into the tower's architecture. The lower floors were sparse, guarded by sand elementals that fell easily to frost and flame in equal measure, nothing that slowed him down meaningfully. The signal grew clearer the deeper he went, until finally, on what felt like the tower's 7th floor, he found its source. A girl maybe 16 or 17, chained inside a cage of solidified sand at the center of a wide chamber, dressed in torn but clearly once elegant robes marked with symbols Khan didn't immediately recognize. Her ears, pointed and delicate, confirmed what the translation fragments had hinted at. Elf, from one of the smaller hidden kingdoms that existed in pockets scattered across the tower dimensions, rarely seen by outsiders. She looked up sharply the moment he entered, exhaustion and wariness fighting for control of her expression. Another one, she said, voice hoarse but carrying clear defiance. Come to gawk, or to sell me to the light faction like the last group did. Neither. Khan approached the cage slowly, studying the sandbars for weak points. Who put you here? Lightkeepers. She spat the word like it tasted bad. They found my kingdom's location 3 months ago, said royal blood makes a useful bargaining chip with the higher rulers. My father refused their terms, so they took me instead. Khan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened at the mention of the light faction. He'd had his own complicated history with their recruitment pitches, honeyed promises about destiny wrapped around demands that never fully explained what they actually wanted. They still coming back for you? Guards rotate every 6 hours. Should be another 2 before the next shift. She studied him for a long moment, something calculating in her gaze despite her obvious exhaustion. You're not with the Shadow Council trying to steal me as leverage against them, are you? Because I've heard that story too. I'm not stealing anyone. Figured I'd let you out and you can decide the rest yourself. That seemed to catch her off guard more than anything else he'd said. She studied him a moment longer, then nodded slowly, some of the wariness easing from her posture. Princess Syria, she offered. Of the verdant hidden kingdom, for whatever that's worth to you. Khan, doesn't matter what kingdom I'm from. Don't have one anymore. He shattered the sand cage with a single frost-wrapped strike, the crystallized bars crumbling apart cleanly, and helped her down from the raised platform where she'd been chained, for what she said was nearly 2 weeks straight. They didn't make it out cleanly. The Lightkeeper guards returned early, alerted by some alarm Khan hadn't noticed tripping, and the chamber filled with armored figures bearing golden light-infused weapons within minutes. 6 of them, disciplined and coordinated in a way that suggested actual military training rather than the usual scattered tower guardians. "Return the princess," their leader said, voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who expected immediate compliance. "She belongs to the Light Faction's custody by right of capture. She's not property," Khan said, "belongs to herself." "You have no authority to interfere with faction business," shadow-aligned player. Didn't ask for authority. The fight that followed was fast and brutal, the Lightkeepers pressing an aggressive formation designed to overwhelm through coordinated strikes, rather than individual strength. Khan fought differently than he had against the Blood Moon Singer, more economical, weaving between attackers with sword control guiding blows that disarmed rather than destroyed, while Darkness handled the flanking guards with quiet, efficient shadow strikes that dropped them before they registered the threat. Syria, despite weeks of captivity, proved far from helpless herself, catching a dropped weapon mid-fight and driving off one guard with a precision that spoke of real training beneath the exhaustion. The fight ended with all 6 Lightkeepers unconscious rather than dead, Khan's deliberate choice even in the heat of combat, and a notification blinked open the moment the last guard fell. Hidden quest complete. Princess of the Hidden Kingdom. Reward: access to Verdant Kingdom Alliance. Light Faction reputation: hostile. Shadow Council reputation: rising sharply. Syria stared at the fallen guards, then at him, something shifting in her expression that hadn't been there before. "You had no reason to help me," she said quietly. "No obligation. I'm not even from a kingdom with any real power left. Most players would have left me here rather than make an enemy of the Light Faction. Wasn't calculating the politics when I walked in. That's exactly why it matters." She reached up, unclasping something from beneath her torn robes. A small pendant carved from pale green stone that seemed to pulse faintly with its own quiet light. "This belonged to my mother. It's not much given what you did, but I want you to have it." Khan hesitated, unused to gifts that weren't system rewards, but something in her expression told him refusing would insult her more than accepting. "Thank you," he said, and meant it more plainly than most things he said to reporters or strangers. He didn't know yet what the pendant would eventually do, some dormant property Syria herself only half understood, passed down through generations of her family without a clear explanation of its full purpose. For now, it was simply a gift from someone who'd expected nothing and received unearned kindness instead, and something about that exchange settled warmly in a chest that usually stayed carefully guarded. The Light Faction's response came within days. A formal declaration circulated through association channels naming Khan a hostile entity against their interests, the first time any player had received such a designation directly from a ruling faction. Public opinion split immediately, some praising him for standing against what they called an increasingly authoritarian faction, others condemning him for making a permanent enemy of beings powerful enough to reshape entire regions. The Shadow Council, in contrast, sent a formal commendation through the same channels, along with a reward bundle Khan hadn't expected: rare artifact cards, a rank increase in faction standing, and a brief message from the Shadow Ruler itself, simple and characteristically blunt. "You continue to prove useful in ways I did not anticipate." Khan read it once, smirked faintly, and moved on to the next notification waiting in his queue. He didn't have much time to dwell on any of it. The zombie tower manifested less than a week later, and this one broke every pattern Season 6 had established so far, because the moment scouts breached its lower floors, they didn't find monsters at all. They found soldiers. Armed, armored, and unmistakably human, wielding weapons that hummed with technology no tower had ever produced before. The zombie tower earned its name from early scouting reports, back before anyone understood what was actually waiting inside, but by the time Khan stood at its entrance, the name had already stopped making sense. Scout footage showed rotting corpses shambling through lower floors, same as any standard undead tower. But deeper in, past the third checkpoint, the footage cut to something else entirely. Soldiers in matte black armor, moving with mechanical precision, weapons that fired something other than bullets, cutting down the shambling dead with efficient, almost bored coordination. They're not tower guardians, Park explained, spreading printed stills across the briefing table. Our analysts think they're a separate faction entirely, operating inside the tower on their own agenda. No idea what they want or where they came from. Human? Mostly. Enhanced, definitely. Some kind of cybernetic augmentation we haven't seen from any registered faction. Park tapped one still, a close-up of a woman standing at the center of a cleared checkpoint. Dark hair cropped short, one arm replaced entirely by something mechanical that gleamed under the tower's dim lighting. This one's been identified in 3 other tower incidents this year. Natasha Ivanova, former military, before the towers. Now she runs something the intelligence community's calling the Iron Directive. Independent operation, not aligned with any ruler faction we've catalogued. What's she after? Unknown. Every report says the same thing. She clears sections of towers with terrifying efficiency, then vanishes before association teams arrive. No pattern to what she's extracting or why. Khan studied the still for a long moment. Something in the woman's posture familiar in a way he couldn't immediately place. Calm under pressure. Economical movement. The kind of person who'd learned to stop wasting energy on anything that didn't matter. I'll find out, he said, and left the briefing without waiting for Park's usual warnings about caution. The lower floors of the zombie tower played out exactly like the scout reports. Endless, shambling corpses filling narrow corridors, easy enough to clear with frost that dropped their body temperature past any threshold that let them keep moving. Darkness handled flanks while Khan pushed forward, and within an hour they'd reached the checkpoint where the footage had first shown Iron Directive soldiers. The checkpoint was empty when they arrived. Cleared, corpses already reduced to ash, evidence of a fight recently concluded. They found the soldiers 2 floors deeper, engaged in a firefight against something Khan hadn't expected. Not zombies. A pack of armored constructs, mechanical and clearly tower native, defending what looked like a sealed vault door at the chamber's center. Natasha Ivanova stood at the front of her small squad, directing fire with sharp, economical hand signals, her mechanical arm reloading a weapon Khan didn't recognize with fluid, practiced motion. She noticed him the moment he stepped into the chamber, dark eyes flicking over him once, assessing, before returning to the fight in front of her. Not your fight, player, she called over the gunfire. Stay out of it and we won't have a problem. What's behind the door? Above your clearance. Khan considered walking away, genuinely considered it, but the constructs pressing her squad back were adapting faster than her soldiers could compensate for, shield patterns shifting to counter each new attack angle. Whatever discipline the Iron Directive operated under, they weren't built to win this particular fight. He stepped in anyway. Frost swept through the construct formation in a wide arc, locking joints and seizing mechanical parts mid-motion, and sword control guided a series of precise strikes that dismantled 3 constructs before Natasha's squad fully registered what had happened. Darkness handled the rear line, shadow-fast and silent, and within minutes the chamber's remaining constructs lay in scattered, unmoving pieces. Natasha lowered her weapon slowly, studying Khan with an expression that had shifted from wary to something more calculating. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You looked like you were losing. We had it handled. You had 3 soldiers about to get flanked and a shield pattern you hadn't cracked yet." Khan glanced past her toward the vault door. "What's actually behind it?" She was quiet for a long moment, weighing something Khan couldn't read on her face. Then, unexpectedly, she gestured for her squad to stand down and approached him directly, mechanical arm whirring faintly with each movement. "Pre-invasion research data," she said finally. "From before the towers, when governments were already experimenting with augmentation technology in secret. This tower's sealed a cache of it behind that vault. I've been chasing fragments of this project across 6 towers this year." "Why?" Something flickered across her expression, old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "Because the augmentation that saved my life after the first invasion is slowly killing me now. Rejection syndrome. The people who built this tech either died in the first wave or disappeared afterward. This is the only lead I have left on a fix." Khan didn't respond immediately, turning the vault door over with a critical eye, running fingers along a seal that pulsed faintly with the same energy signature he'd seen on high-tier hidden quest locks before. "This isn't a normal vault lock," he said. "It's keyed to something specific. Probably needs a card or title most players wouldn't have." "I know. I've been trying to force it for 3 tower cycles now. Forcing it's not going to work." He studied the pattern a moment longer, then reached into his inventory. pulling up the Bell of the Bone Throne artifact he'd earned from the Blood Moon Singer. An item he'd never found a use for until this exact second. The resonance pattern etched into its surface matched the vault's seal almost perfectly. He pressed it against the lock. The vault door groaned, ancient mechanisms grinding, and slowly swung open to reveal a chamber lined with data cores and preserved research terminals, untouched by time, in a way that defied normal tower physics. Natasha stared at it, like she was looking at something she'd stopped believing actually existed. How did you... Right key, wrong lock. Until now. Khan stepped back, letting her approach the vault alone. Not my research. You should be the one going through it. She turned to look at him, something unguarded crossing her face for just a moment before her usual controlled composure reasserted itself. Most players would have demanded a cut of whatever's in here, or reported this location to the Association for a bounty. Not interested in either. Then what do you want? Khan considered the question honestly for a second. Nothing, this time. Figured you'd earned it, chasing this across 6 towers. She studied him a long moment, mechanical arm whirring softly as it adjusted grip on the weapon still holstered at her side, and something like respect settled into her expression, rare and carefully rationed. The people who sent me on this project told me the Hero King only helps when there's something in it for him, she said. They were wrong. They're wrong about a lot of things. He left her to the vault, darkness trailing behind, and cleared the remaining floors of the tower with mechanical efficiency, the boss waiting at the summit turning out to be little more than a formality after everything that had come before it. A corrupted military AI core that Sword Control dismantled in under 10 minutes. What Khan didn't learn until later, through a brief encrypted message Natasha sent through channels he didn't know she had access to, was that the data cache had contained exactly what she needed. A partial fix for her rejection syndrome, buying her years she hadn't expected to have. The message ended with a single line that stuck with him longer than most things people said to him. I don't forget debts. If you ever need the Iron Directive, you'll have it. He filed that away carefully, the same way he filed away every genuine alliance that didn't come wrapped in politics or performance. A short list that had grown slightly longer this season than it had in the 4 before it combined. The tower's final reward screen blinked open as he stepped back into daylight. Association officials already gathering at the entrance for statements neither he nor Natasha's squad, long since vanished back into whatever shadows the Iron Directive operated from, had any interest in giving. Zombie Tower cleared. New title, Vault Breaker. Reputation gained. Iron Directive. Allied, rare status. Achievement unlocked. Debt owed by a stranger. He read through it, allowed himself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction, and turned toward the transport waiting to take him home, already half expecting the next tower to appear within days the way every other tower this season had. What actually appeared, 3 days later, wasn't a tower at all. It was a door. Association scouts found it embedded in the ruins of an old subway station on the city's east side. A shimmering archway that hadn't existed the day before, radiating an energy signature unlike anything cataloged in 5 years of tower manifestations. No monsters guarded it. No hostile readings registered from any scanning equipment they pointed at it. It simply stood there, quiet and patient, waiting for someone to walk through. Association leadership debated for 2 full days about whether to investigate at all, split between scientific curiosity and the very reasonable fear that something this unprecedented might be exactly the kind of threat nobody survived learning about firsthand. Khan made the decision for them by walking through it without waiting for permission, 3 hours after Park mentioned its existence over the phone almost as an afterthought. The transition felt nothing like entering a tower. There was no gate, no floor counter, no system window announcing a boss ahead. One moment he stood in the ruined subway station, darkness pressed close against his leg, and the next, he stood somewhere else entirely, a world bathed in soft golden light, air thick with the scent of incense and something sweeter underneath it, like flowers that didn't grow anywhere on Earth. He stood at the edge of a city unlike anything he'd seen before, white stone buildings rising in graceful spirals, streets filled with people wearing robes marked with symbols similar to the ones Syria's clothing had carried, though styled differently, more ornate. Above the city, suspended in the sky without any visible support, floated a massive temple structure, gleaming faintly gold even under open daylight. A notification window blinked open in front of him, different from any he'd seen before, formatted in a style the standard tower system never used. Welcome, outsider. You have entered the sanctum of Saint Alicia. This realm exists outside standard tower classification. Proceed with awareness. Not all rules here follow the system you know. Khan read it twice, one eyebrow raised, and looked around at the golden city stretching out before him, utterly unlike anything Season 6 had produced so far. Well, he said quietly, mostly to Darkness, who'd gone still and alert beside him, silver eyes tracking movement in the crowded streets ahead. Guess we're not in a tower anymore. He'd barely taken 3 steps forward when the crowd ahead parted suddenly, murmurs rippling through the street, and a figure emerged from the temple's base, descending stone steps with an unhurried grace that drew every eye in the vicinity. She wore robes of pure white, trimmed in gold that seemed to catch light even in shadow, her expression calm in a way that reminded Khan uncomfortably of the Shadow Ruler's presence, ancient and layered beneath a deceptively simple surface. Unlike the shadow, though, her face was visible, young-looking despite something in her eyes that suggested centuries rather than years. She stopped a few paces from him, studying him with open curiosity rather than hostility. "An outsider," she said, voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "It has been a very long time since anyone crossed the threshold uninvited. Didn't see an invitation required." A faint smile touched her lips, there and gone quickly. "No. I suppose you wouldn't have. I am Alicia, keeper of this sanctum. And you, I think, are the player the outside world has begun calling Hero King? Though something tells me you dislike that title as much as I suspect you do. You'd be right. Good." Her smile lingered a moment longer this time. Titles rarely capture anything true about the people forced to wear them. I would know. Khan studied her carefully, aware of just how little he understood about where he'd actually walked into, and aware too of the way the crowd around them watched this exchange with a mixture of reverence and barely restrained shock, like an outsider addressing their saint directly was something that simply didn't happen. "Why'd the door open?" he asked. "Nothing about this season's felt random so far. Figure this isn't either." Something shifted behind Alicia's calm expression, subtle but unmistakable, the first crack in an otherwise serene composure. "The sanctum has remained sealed from the outside world for longer than your civilization has kept written records," she said carefully. "It opened now because something within our own walls has begun to rot, and I am no longer certain I possess the strength to cut it out alone." Behind her, deeper in the Golden City, a bell tolled once, low and mournful, and several of the gathered crowd flinched visibly at the sound, exchanging uneasy glances that told Khan this world's peaceful surface hid something considerably darker underneath. "Corruption," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Corruption," Alicia confirmed quietly. "Among my own clergy. I have suspected for months and proven nothing. I called for aid through channels I did not fully understand, desperate enough to risk opening a door I swore never to open again. I did not expect it to answer so quickly. I certainly did not expect what walked through it." Her eyes flicked briefly to Darkness, still alert at Khan's side, then back to Khan himself, something calculating and hopeful warring behind her careful expression. "I do not know yet if you are the answer to my sanctum's rot," she admitted, "or an entirely new problem I have invited into my home. But something tells me I am about to find out regardless of what I would prefer." Khan glanced past her at the golden temple looming above the city, at the uneasy crowd still watching from a careful distance, at a world entirely outside anything the tower system had prepared him for, and felt the familiar, quiet pull of a problem worth solving settle over him the same way it always did. "Show me what's rotting," he said. "I'll tell you if I can cut it out." Alicia studied him a long moment, something like relief and apprehension both flickering behind her ancient eyes, and finally nodded, turning to lead him deeper into a city that had no idea yet how completely its saint's decision was about to upend everything it believed about the world beyond its sealed door. Behind them, unnoticed by either, a figure in temple robes lingered at the edge of the crowd, watching the exchange with an expression that held nothing of the reverence surrounding it. Whoever they were, whatever role they played in the rot Alicia had sensed but not yet named, they disappeared back into the temple's shadowed corridors the moment Khan and Alicia moved out of sight, already sending word ahead to warn someone that an outsider had arrived, and that he was already far too capable to underestimate. The Golden City's peace, untouched for centuries, had just run out of time.